Hey everyone, we want to welcome you to the Deeper Dive podcast of Hopevale Church. This is where we take the message from the weekend and we keep the conversation going during the week. I'm Dan Davis, senior pastor here at Hopevale Church. We are in the Great Lakes Bay region of mid-Michigan, that's Saginaw, Bay City, surrounding areas. And today I'm joined by yesterday's teacher, Adam Harbaugh. And Adam, you introduced yourself as our Central Ministries pastor, which, again, you and Pastor Sam are having a shift in roles and responsibilities, not radically different, but better positioned to just lead us into the future. So we definitely want to talk about the message, but I'd love to hear you talk a little more about this new responsibility that you have and what does a Central Ministries pastor do?
What does that mean? Yeah, we're excited for this change. I mean, as you guys talked about Sam's news, that'll, I think, be a little more forward-facing, really just helps to work through some of those pinch points that we have identified as a staff over the years where our structure kind of got in the way of us being as effective as we could be. One of the stories I like to kind of point to was at Mother's Day, the Bay City campus, they pulled off their gift to moms as they were walking into the door in a really well-organized, holistic way as an entire campus. And in Saginaw, we had elements of recognizing the moms, but it was kind of tucked away back in kids ministry, and it wasn't as holistic as it should have been. And so that's like a real practical example of how having a Saginaw team, they can all be together to wrap their heads around how they're going to do things for the Saginaw campus in a more consistent, holistic kind of a way. So those are the Saginaw and Bay City campus team structure. And then the central side of things that I'll be a part of is really just kind of looking at the overall structure of implementing like our life model across all ministry areas at the church so that there is consistency in what and how the delivery of those various ministries looks. So it'll be fun.
You know, the Mother's Day example is really good. Well, two things you said, the Mother's Day example and consistency. So for those of you watching, listening, who are kind of geeky and org chart thinking, I mean, picture, Saginaw campus, Bay City campus, Central Ministries, and you all working together. And we've often said this, the size of Saginaw is different than the size of Bay City. Saginaw's more like an ocean liner. Bay City's like a speedboat. So not everything is going to look identical.
Right.
But we want to make sure the main things and the key principles and vision and values are held together consistently. So, I mean, a great example is the baptism services, right?
Yes.
Like you have kind of a coordination role in that really as then Bay City and Saginaw implement that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're thinking about the fact that we are one church. And so I want Bay City or Saginaw people to know exactly what their first step has to be baptized at Hopevale. So that's why we've got one form on the website at the /baptism, right? Anybody who wants to take that step of being baptized, that's your starting point. And then from there, we can work with our specific campus teams for the people that they need to walk beside in preparation for that specific date. So, things like baptism, that's one example. Like we said, our life model and all of our groups ministries, that's going to be another one. All of our pastoral care and making sure that we're consistent on those fronts so that nobody slips through the cracks, right? We don't want that to happen as people experience being part of Hopevale. Global missions, that is another example of Central Ministries where our various campuses will never have kind of their own global missions partner separate. Like we are really one church in that global missions approach as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of brag on you because I think a lot of people might not know that you've really been a great champion in developing and growing pastoral care in our church. So it's not just pastors caring for the congregation, but also we do that in groups, of course, but then other people who have kind of shepherding care mercy gifts have jumped on board as well without the official pastor title, have been ministering to people who are either homebound or in the hospital or recovering from major surgery or major illness. And it's been really great. And then that has bled over to, I'm just going to keep going, into the Saginaw Prayer Room, which, again, you helped launch a couple months ago. And again, we're really just trying to equip and mobilize, unleash the body for ministry, right? Which I know is just a big heart for you. So
absolutely. And it's so awesome to see like the light bulb go on for people when they're like, oh, like, yeah, this is what I'm gifted in and passionate about. And we're like, there is this specific opportunity for you to exercise those gifts, and just the way that that lights them up. And I think sometimes maybe there's a sense that as pastors, we must be spiritually gifted in every area. And the reality is like we have things that we are gifted in, and then there are things that we're not as gifted in. And so we are better together as a church when we're utilizing the gifts that the Spirit has given everybody and helping them find that spot to jump in and contribute to being a part of the body.
Yeah, definitely. Right? That value of shared ministry, of trying to do everybody doing something and unleashed. And I guess we really feel it a lot too with fall coming and a lot of new ministries launching. And so those of you watching and listening will hear a lot more about that, of opportunities to connect in ministry. So good. So we were talking off mic that the number one question from the message yesterday is, did you get your bag back? And we're going to hold off on that. Okay. We're going to get to that. This is what we call drama and, creating teasers, right?
Yeah.
But, one of the things that I've loved about this Acts series is we've involved a lot of different pastors, and we kind of had this shared session of picking the passages and the stories that we wanted. So, one of my favorite questions is, what drew you to this story, and why did you just lock into the story of Peter and Cornelius from Acts chapter 10?
Yeah, there's so many incredible stories to pick from, and it was kind of like a free for all when you're like looking at all the options on the spreadsheet. Which one do I want to put my name?
Fantasy football draft, right?
Yeah. And so honestly, the Acts 10, Peter and Cornelius, like that was my primary one that I hoped to peg my name next to, and so I was glad to see the way that it worked out. And really what draws me to that one is that it speaks to this idea of sometimes we are called by the Spirit to change our minds on some things. And I know change and letting go of maybe something that you've held on to really deeply, even from some of those religious like conviction standpoints, you have these things that you hold on to for so long and have been kind of just ground into you over the years. But then the more you read the gospel and scripture and stories like that, and you're like, wow, what if there are some things that I'm hanging on to that the Spirit doesn't want me to hang on to, so that I can be more open to where and how the Spirit might want to have me positioned to do what He wants to do. So that's kind of what drew me to it. One thing going into it that I always thought, usually when I prepare for a message, you want to kind of orient yourself to like, okay, why am I bringing this? And one of the things that's at the top of kind of a worksheet page that I work through is like, we're preaching for change, right? We're not just preaching to feel good about something or anything like that, but we really want to lay our lives bare before the Lord and say, how do you want to align my heart, my life, my mind with who you are and what you want to do in and through my life?
Yeah, so good.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and again, kind of what we've been trying to do all throughout this series is, our roots go all the way back to this church, right? To this Holy Spirit, to this work of the gospel, this unstoppable work, this movement of hope, right? Okay, so I got to laugh, right? So opening question, have you ever been certain you were right about something only to find out later you were wrong? And every once in a while, I wish Hopevale had an elbow cam, right? These this picture into the auditorium and watching spouses kind of, elbow each other.
Right.
Like I read that question, I go, oh, you mean today? Because it's like, if we're really honest with ourselves, right? It's and I appreciate that you led with just some vulnerability and told that story, right? About the bags and the DR trip,
right?
Which, okay, I'm going to be a little pro Adam here. Okay. It's like, if you've ever led a group, it's like herding cats and there's so many, and you feel it because it's not, you're trying to make deadlines, you're trying to get through like, I totally get that. But
I know. But if your wife and another team member stop you and try to assure you, like that's one of those things in hindsight, it's just like, Adam, what were you thinking? Like they gave you the information right there. You could have paused for 20 more seconds, grabbed the bag and gone on the way. But I was just so locked in to like, nope, told the team it's 12 bags, let's roll kind of a thing.
That's so good.
But hindsight is 20/20.
Yes. So
Well, first, one of the other questions is, so how did we end up with 13 bags?
Oh,
right?
okay.
So a couple of the team members, for whatever reason, decided to keep their luggage separate. And so that's why we ended up with the 13 bags. And then thankfully, Delta or whoever it was that we were flying with, a couple days later, they delivered the bag right here, I think, to our Shattuck Road Ministry Center. So
I know some podcast
well.
format, they have premium content for subscribers. So
I'm not
maybe on
naming
that one,
names.
you'll name the okay.
I'm not
okay,
naming
yeah.
names. I think I know who it was, but that's
so
okay.
Funny. I know.
So then the joke is like, when you have a sermon illustration where like, you were the moron kind of a thing. I'm like, well, hey, at least I got a sermon illustration.
There we
of it,
go.
Right? There was a
we
purpose
go.
and a reason, came out 10 years later. So.
Isn't it funny? It's the whole like, we'll laugh on this eventually, but when you're in the moment, not right away, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. So, and then really out of the blocks, and you circled back at the end, this one statement, and I'm going to hold on to this, right? An open heart is better than a closed mind. And you just felt like that was just the one sentence that really captured the essence of this story.
Yeah, I really did. The more I was just reading through it and just really kind of soaking into these two guys' story and what was being brought to the table, right? Like they both had some changing of, their hearts and their minds to walk through in the situation and to be obedient to the things that were clearly happening and being orchestrated by the Spirit in front of them. And then, reading the story, and I'm like, my mind went back to that story about the bags and the DR, and it just kind of all came together. And I'm like, it's just so much better to have an open heart to the realities that are trying to be accomplished, rather than just that closed mind about, I've already made up my mind about this. This is the way that it is, and it has to be, and I will stick to that until the death.
Yeah, that's good. So a few weeks ago, when Kathy and I were here, and we were talking about the story of Philip, and one of the terms I used was this whole providential orchestration, of God bringing people together that in no other common circumstances should they even meet, right? I mean, I think we really tap into that. And what's interesting, I'm just going to kind of like go off on my own like reflections, right? But it's really interesting. So like Acts chapter 9, the beginning is the Damascus Road story, which is like so powerful. But then you get to the end, and there's a couple Peter stories that Peter is in a place called Lydda. Then he's led to Joppa, and he performs this miracle of raising Dorcas from the dead, right? And then he stays with Simon the tanner for a while.
I think he had that beautiful oceanside view.
He did.
The rooftop where he could go and pray. I think that's why he stuck around
So
there.
So the book of Acts is really, if you have access to a Bible atlas or a map, I mean, it really does, because it helps you kind of pull the story together. I looked this up again. I think it's about 30 miles, I think, between Joppa and Caesarea. There's a little debate on that, but yeah, it's really good. Oh, by the way, so historical fact, this one's for Amber if she's listening too, right? So Peter stayed at the house of Simon the tanner.
Yes.
He was originally supposed to stay at the house of Danny the tanner, but his home was full. So, there we go. So.
Nice.
Yes, there we go.
So about the map, though, I mean, I'm a visual person, and so in my study, I mean, I did pull up the map, and it's just so helpful to see it. I didn't end up throwing that up on the slide.
Right.
But it was a good reminder, just the visual. That's why I threw in this is like a 12-hour walk, right? And even in the timing of all that, the way that God was orchestrating it, right? Because Cornelius has his vision while he's praying, this is happening, and then he sends his guys down. So on their 12-hour journey, Peter's now on the roof praying.
Yes.
And he has the vision, and then as Peter is pondering that, knock, 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 is Peter there? And it's just like the timing was pretty cool, the way that it all worked out.
I'm so glad you read that. One of the really phrases that jumped out of me when you were reading is he has this vision, but he doesn't know what to do with it, because that word pondering his vision is actually is what the scriptures say, right? And God, there's something for us as well that light bulb moments are
Right.
often not just one singular thing, but there's a nudge, there's awakening, but it
And
still is a little fuzzy. And
right.
yeah,
And again, I mean, thankfully this was Peter. So he was given the vision and it was like, surely not, Lord. Like three times again,
isn't that
digs his heels in and it's like, no way, this can't be what it's all about. But thankfully, you're right. He took that time to think about and to ponder what on earth this could possibly mean. And so we might not always get it right in the very first time, in the very first moment, but I think that 12-hour walk probably helped him have a little bit more processing time, and just you could see his heart beginning to open, right? Even the fact that he invited those guys in to Simon or Danny, the tanner's house, whoever it was, like he invited them in. And even that was the beginning of like, he's becoming open to something that was literally off limits.
Well,
right?
that's the whole thing, right? This is really getting geeky, but right, tanners, right? People who take animal hides and make them, and so there's butchery and blood, and even that might have been a stretch for Peter, right? And then that's going on. Yeah, and wow. So anyways, so Peter's got this going on, and we talked about this in the Galatians series too. I mean, 2,000 years later, and virtually all of us are Gentiles. I don't think we can fully grasp what a leap this was, right? For Peter, and which led to really what the three words that you brought out that I just thought were like, I now realize. Yeah. So you locked into that. What was it about that phrase or that moment that not just maybe unlocked the passage for you, but that just drew you to it and that you really identified with?
It just felt like, as I read it, like this was the clear moment where Peter was like, I have to make a choice here. And knowing Peter, it could have gone one of two ways, right? He could have gotten it wrong. Thankfully, he got it right in this situation. But for him to just verbalize, like, God has been speaking to me. He's been showing me things and pressing me outside of my comfort zone. And then there was just this moment of truth where he's like, I now realize. And that just to me indicated the heart and the mind change, the shift, the opening to view the world in a new and different way that would have been completely against what he has known his whole entire life. And that's fascinating because, in my, I've got the degree in counseling and stuff like that. And one of the lines that one of my instructors said was that I always resonated with. He's like, if change were easy, everybody would be doing it, right? Change is not easy for people, for any of us. Like, change can be really hard. It's uncomfortable. It's unfamiliar. We don't know what is life is going to look like on the other side of it. We don't know any of those things, but the importance of being willing and open and humble enough to come to a place where you're like, I now realize. And the humility in that is like it involves a recognition that maybe the way that I perceived it or thought or believed in the past, if I continue to hang on to that, I'm going to be missing out on what God is trying to do in and through me to participate in this unstoppable movement of the Spirit. And that's kind of it's a reality. It should be, I think, a reality check for us where it's like, if we're not willing to have those I now realize moments, God will find somebody else to do. So like if Peter and Cornelius in this story, if they had both just, played it safe and not chosen to be stretched outside of what they were comfortable and used to, I'm pretty sure God would have written the story through somebody else, right? Because he wasn't going to be stopped. The Gentiles were going to be receivers of this good news of who Jesus was and what he did.
Wow, that's really good. Okay, so this is like vulnerable time. Do you, as you look back on your growth in Christ, you grew up in a Christian home.
Yeah.
And a lot of times maybe we have an element of certainty in our life in that kind of environment. Yeah. Do you have any I now realize moments where something you were so sure of, you're like, oh my gosh, I think my eyes have been opened a little bit. Maybe I use the word barriers, right? Maybe some barriers that were keeping you from even knowing the Lord more or ministering more effectively.
I think so, and that's there wasn't necessarily one situation or example that came to mind, but yeah, I mean, you look back and it's like there are, beliefs and things that I think, were really communicated in a very strong and certain way. And I mean, for me personally, if I can just put this on the table and say it, like, I mean, I grew up in a smaller evangelical church, right, with one senior pastor and then like part-time worship pastors along the way and things like that. But for whatever reason in that context, the topic of like women in ministry and female pastors and things like that would come up. And it was always like, no, pastors can only be men kind of a thing. And like, while there are, examples of, specific things and ways that, men and women might have some different roles and opportunities in the church, I think that there has been somewhat of a limitation placed on the work that the Spirit is doing in men and women as they're equipped for ministry, in the church. And so for me personally, I think that's one where it was like, you hear those messages for so long throughout the time growing up, and it's like, well, yes, certainly that must be true. And, that began to be, I think, pushed on a little bit in college, and then more ministry experience, and then just more reading of the gospel and what this is all about. And it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. And, there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, all of these kind of barriers that we put into place. And I just feel like, wow, it feels like the Spirit just wants to unleash his church, men and women who are equipped by his Spirit to go out and, be a part of exercising those gifts in ministry in the world. And so that, for me personally, that's been one shift. I think there are other topics, I think, where the church has kind of honed in too far on some topics, and it's been kind of ostracizing to people where they feel like there's not a place for them to participate in what the church is supposed to be all about, right?
Well, here at Hopevale, we talk a lot about, the value of focused faith and majoring on the majors. And I think this whole thing really presses on that. It's like, what really are my die fors, right?
Yeah.
So as I was thinking about asking you this question, I was like turning the mirror to myself, and I flashed back. So our story is, I'd gone to seminary in Dallas, Texas, and, Dallas is like the hub of the Bible Belt. I mean, everyone's air quote a Christian, there's a big church on every corner, like 7-Elevens. I mean, it's just crazy. And then from seminary, we went to a church in Canada. We were living in Ontario, Canada, and just safe to say it's more unchurched up there than it was in Dallas. And early on, I became part of like a pastor's fellowship from different denominations, and denominations who would have beliefs across the board that I wouldn't line up with one for one. And yet you get to know people whose hearts are in a really good place, who love Jesus, who want to see lives transformed, who believe in John 3:16 just like I do, and it's like, not that I'm going to, align my secondary or tertiary beliefs with them, but it's like, okay, the church is so much bigger than my little,
you get a sense there's more freedom that can happen there, right?
And it really pushed on me to go, instead of focusing on our differences, where's our common ground, right? And let's build off of that. And I think Hopevale has a lot of that spirit. I think we have a lot of that spirit in our partnerships in the area, both as we work with other churches or ministries, but then even, common good work in our church that, again, I know you've been very involved with over the years. So,
and I mean, I agree. And I love that that's the part of what we want to focus on, that there are a lot of not primary important issues that I think it's okay to disagree on and things like that. Let's just make sure that they're not becoming overly elevated to a place where we're kind of, drilling our stake in the ground on things, where it shouldn't be. And that's where it really is like, if you're willing to step in and fellowship and recognize how God is at work in this region, let's say, and different churches and ministry partners and things like that, if you wanted to focus on a lot of secondary issues, you could find a lot of areas where there's divergence of opinion. But That's where I love. I mean, you've brought so much of this focus, like let's keep the main thing, and if we can agree on the heart of the gospel, then there should be nothing preventing us from working together
Right.
for the spread of the gospel and the good of the region.
Right.
Yeah.
While acknowledging differences, right? That we're not,
Yeah.
but we're not letting that get in the way, and we're
Right.
this battle for rightness or
Yeah. Totally.
that's good. So one of the things I really loved that you did in your message, I'm gonna like preach some of your message back to you, right? You kind of then on like an applicational level had some of us think about Cornelius or think about Peter, right? So let me just, you said, are you identifying with Cornelius and you, the cultural outsider, and you just said, be willing to open your heart to understand that you have a spot in the family of God, no exclusions. Like, have you run into people like that you've like, it really is a barrier? I think some of us who are maybe so churched or been in the church so long, it might be hard for us to go, really? Is this a thing? So, but you said it was, right? Church is pointless and a waste of time. The church doesn't need me. I'm beyond the love of Jesus. Yeah.
I think there can be a really wide spectrum of people across kind of some of those examples, or I'm like, people might have these kinds of things in mind. First of all, one of the things, again, kind of a shift, I think sometimes the church has treated people who are not part of the church as though, they must just be, God haters who have no morality and they're just so in need of Jesus. And they are in need of Jesus. But I think when you look at people, there is a heart to do good. I think there is a lot of times a heart to know God. And sometimes you see that even in people who are like, I don't believe God exists. And yet there are things in their lives where maybe they're praying or they're wrestling with whether or not God does truly exist. And I think it speaks to this deep place in all of our hearts where we want to know that somebody created us and that there's a purpose for my life and that I'm loved and accepted and all of those things. So I think there's this deep longing in everybody's heart that is there. And, in a lot of people in the culture today, I think you see like people are trying to do good. They're trying to, be kind to others and take care of the environment and all of these good things. They're going about it with a good heart, but maybe they feel like, there's a disconnect between how they're trying to live their lives and what they perceive the church to be all about. And it creates that disconnect. And so,
that's what's interesting about Cornelius, right?
Yeah.
He's described as devout, God-fearing, a generous person, giving to those in need and prayed regularly to God. So I those kind of people are out there. I think sometimes we paint these like either you're in the church and you're all in for Jesus, or you're a stone cold atheist who's but there are a lot of people, and I think the term was seeker. It's like there's just a longing, and it's like, and they're looking for this, what we talk about, capital L life, right?
Yeah. I mean, you even look at statistics on charitable giving and things like that. We think of, giving to the church as something that only Christians do, but the heart of a lot of people they're giving to organizations that they're passionate about and things like that. And they're not doing it from a place of, this is my tithe back to God. They're just, I want to be generous and give back because I have more than I could need for myself. And where can I make investments out in the world to make a difference? So this is like they have some morality. They want to do good things. They want to be a part of something bigger than themselves and to make a difference. And then along the way, for whatever reason, maybe they have just felt like the church isn't the place where I can truly do that or exercise that.
Right.
And we would look at them and be like, oh my goodness, like the doors are wide open. Like, come on in and be a part of the true capital L life that is offered through Jesus. Can we introduce you to him?
Yes. Right? Yeah.
So
that's good.
So again, the broad spectrum, and we never know who might be walking through the door. So there literally could have been somebody there yesterday who was like, I'm giving church one final shot, because a lot of what I read in the news and the stories that I've heard, or maybe my own personal experiences, like they've been burned and they're like, this might be the last shot that I'm giving the Lord to show up. And so I hope that the message that they or anybody else who's walking through the door hears is that, like, you have a place to belong here and to pursue your life with Jesus. none of us are at the end game
Yeah.
point.
Oh my
we're
gosh.
we're all in process, and we're all in that journey. And so let's invite you to take that journey with us. So
That's really good. And it may not be as dramatic as this Peter story of someone else coming alongside the Corneliuses of our life, but that's just going through life with just this posture of availability and getting in conversations, right? And just seeing where the Lord takes it, right?
Totally.
Okay, so then you got Peter.
You got Peter.
Are you identifying with Peter, the cultural insider? Now, you said this, be willing to let go of something you're certain when Jesus is calling you to participate in his work. You do that by taking a fresh dive into Scripture to evaluate how you were taught in the past was rooted in excluding people from Jesus. I read that. I'm like, okay, he gave a lot of thought to this, and it's something that I don't know you've seen or you felt or feel strongly about, and just would love for you to unpack that a little more.
I think part of where that comes from, and again, thinking about it through the context of, kind of what we talk about at Hopevale, right? We talk a lot about grace and truth. Jesus came in the fullness of grace and truth, right? I think depending on our people's personality in the church, you might be a little more bent to focus on the grace, or you might be a little more bent to focus on the truth.
Right.
And I think for, those who maybe are a little more focused on the truth side of things, there's this, right? There's that certainty that this is true. And yet while it might, yes, be true, I think if you lead with the truth side of the things, and you maybe have this mentality that if I just beat them over the head hard enough with the Bible, surely they'll get it and they'll understand. But you look at the life of Jesus, and I think that for the people who were on the outside and marginalized and things like that, he consistently led with grace. It doesn't mean that truth was not a part of the picture, but he led with grace. And I think that's, we talk, right? Grace and truth in equal measure, the fullness of
both. Yeah.
But you see Jesus lead with grace, especially to the people who were marginalized and on the outside. And flip that around. Who were the people that he was heavy-handed with on the truth? And it was the religious leaders who were getting it wrong, right? Who wanted to beat the people down with the truth and things like that. So I think the word for all of us would be, yes, absolutely, the fullness of grace and truth. Let's lead with grace and see how the Spirit works in the hearts and minds of people to move them to truth. Because I think that's the work of the Spirit. And if we're living in a place where we feel like it's my job to just, again, kind of beat everybody over the head with the truth, I do not think you'll end up seeing that be very effective in the long run. And that can lead the people who maybe most need to experience the hope of Jesus through his people, that can lead them to a place where they feel, again, ostracized or left out, or I'm not good enough, I'm not qualified enough, I'm not holy enough, all of those things. But, what did Jesus say? I have come to bring in the sick and those who need me. It was never a matter of, you better get your act together and then you're okay to come in, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and here's what's interesting, right? You put up that picture from Cornelius's Instagram, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely pulled up way in the archives.
But seriously, here's what was like running through my mind when, it reminded me, it's like, okay, not only was this guy a Roman soldier, but he was in charge, right? And and maybe from the outside looking in, it's like, what could this guy possibly need? I mean, he's successful in his career. He's tough. He's independent, whatever.
Yep.
And again, isn't that interesting? So it's like, you just don't know what's going on in people's hearts and lives, even based on kind of the exterior, right? And that's just...
Yeah, some of the reading, it's like, as a centurion, right, he got more of the spoils than any of the, people in his army who were in it with him and all those things. He's got probably a nice house in Caesarea on the, so totally. But again, it kind of spoke to this longing that he might have in his heart. And I also thought, those fascinating thoughts of like, what if the centurion who was at the feet of Jesus when he was being, like, what if that was the same guy? That's like a question I'll have for the Lord one day in heaven. But again, put yourself in Peter's shoes, right? And he saw these Roman soldiers put Jesus to death.
Yes.
And then it's a Roman soldier that he is being nudged to interact with. Again, whether or not it was the same guy, like he could be playing tapes, right? We do that sometimes.
Well, and
like,
that's
I'm putting all these guys into one box and one camp, and one Roman soldier who put Jesus to death. I'm going to view any Roman soldier as being the one who put Jesus to death, and like just him having to process through that. Like, are you kidding me, God? This is the guy that you're sending me to his house to tell him about you. Whew.
Yeah, yeah, and we lose a sense of time from outside looking in, but I mean, from when he started following Jesus, the 3 years, crucifixion, resurrection, I don't know, 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Right. And as you were talking too, I thought about the streaming series The Chosen, right? And they even tap into just that Roman dominance and the hatred, right, and the oppression, and you just really get that sense. So the leap, the exclusion, the Peter that he doesn't deserve, I mean, my goodness, right?
So much, again, that just takes me back to like, we've got to keep our hearts open to the reality that this hope that we have in Jesus is for everyone. And so often, maybe the person that God wants to direct you to the most is somebody who you would think is the most like farthest removed from your own personal ability to step in towards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love the idea that, here at Hopevale, that we are full of grace and truth, but people who are willing to take that open heart perspective, like, considering where Jesus is sending me. And maybe your path is being crossed by somebody that you have a little bit of a, surely not, Lord, this can't be it. But man, what if it is? And all you have to do is step through in obedience, show them love and grace, because God has something that he wants to do for them and through them.
Okay, so what might that look like? I mean, I'm going to just be honest, right? Yeah. I've never had a vision like Peter has, and I don't think I've ever quite had a story as dramatic as Peter and Cornelius. So again, not to say that the Spirit can't do that now, but in the normal course of life, what might that look like?
I think, as people, we build these kind of, barriers around differences to some extent, right? And it's like, I'm a Michigan fan, you're an Ohio State fan, right? And this is like the low hanging fruit, but then take it up a few notches. Yeah. I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat. Yeah. I'm evangelical, you are Catholic. I mean, there are so many of these really kind of different boxes that we put people into, and we jump to some of those conclusions, right? Like, I'm a Jewish citizen, you're a Roman centurion, there should be no way that we can interact. But the more we have these open hearts to understand that God has placed us in places to cross-pollinate with people who might be seeking or need encouragement or that invitation to true life in Jesus. And let's just make sure that we're not allowing those barriers to stand in the way of just being open to the possibilities that God might have in mind through friendship, through kindness, through just making sure that we are doing things to express to others that even if we have some of these differences between us, we have this common deal that we are both human beings, whether you believe it or not, created in the image of God. And God tore down every barrier to come from heaven to earth to save everyone and give them that opportunity to respond. And we want to be a part of that restorative work that Jesus continues to do today. And so that's like the open heart side of, don't look at people through any barrier perspective, but think just, I'm going to treat this person as deserving of respect because they were made in the image of God. And what might God be up to in their life?
I'm so glad you said that. And I'm going to step on a little soapbox here, because I think these barriers and these divisions are not just, they're not just a head thing, they're a heart emotional thing. And I think we really live in times that are just so divisive, so polarization, so
Right.
us versus they.
Yep.
And if you don't guard your heart against that, so it's not just I know in my head, but it's like, what am I taking in? What's influencing my emotions? And we really, we kind of lose sight, one, that God's in control. He's got it.
Yeah.
But two, that, our real battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against
Right.
these spiritual principalities, the powers, and dark forces, and anything that would keep us combative or in a place of fear
Yeah.
instead of leading with love is, that's spiritual warfare. That's the church abandoning its call. And I just, you and I have talked about it. We've talked about it, and I've talked about this with congregants, swapped some emails of just somebody who was really in a place of despair going, I just don't like what I'm seeing. I don't like what I'm seeing in the church. I don't like seeing the division. I don't like seeing what everybody's posting and why they're so fired up on the political level, but say nothing about Jesus, and it's like, I get it.
Right.
Right. And that's why it's just so important that we're sitting under Bible teaching, we're interacting with the Word itself, we're around other believers, not just on Sundays, but between Sundays, to get our heads and our hearts right. Otherwise, we're just going to get swept up in the current like it seems like everyone else is.
And I hope that, again, we're humble enough and willing enough to have those I now realize moments.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, as you said, that it's a heart, a mind, an emotion that is behind how you might be feeling about other people. If you're leaning too much into the us versus them, and when you do that builds the barriers between other people. And so I think my word of encouragement would be like, pay attention to if you're feeling very negatively about somebody else. And maybe that is your opening of the heart moment that you need to begin to have to say, okay, maybe my call is to like reach out to somebody that I'm for some reason thinking is my enemy, and build a bridge there and see what God might want to do through that, both in my own heart and life and in the life of the person that I reach out to.
Yeah. I had a conversation with one of our elders last week about this concept in general, and we were just affirming the power of a personal face-to-face conversation and how barriers really can melt down. And when you really hear someone's story, and maybe, it's like poor Cornelius, I mean, up to this point, he did the best with what he could, but he didn't grow up in a scripture reading, synagogue worshiping home. He knew none of it, right? He just had this general sense of, I think there's a God and I want to love him and whatever, right?
Right.
It's like, you don't choose the home you grew up in. You don't, right? You don't choose the influences, and sometimes you don't choose the experiences, bad, destructive, that have happened to you. And yet we just kind of paint these broad brushes of the exterior and put people in boxes. So,
So one thing that I really appreciated yesterday afternoon, I think it was after second service, a guy from our church came up to me, and we were chatting for a second. Then he just stopped and he was like, I've grown up in a Christian home and environment my whole life. And he's like, I think I am identifying a little more with Peter. And he's like, I think, there are probably more things that I need to consider to open my mind to, and, really rethink and maybe kind of reconstruct how he is being called to live as a follower of Jesus in the here and now. And I'm like, I just loved that he said that, because I think there could be a possibility where like, we don't want to hear that, God might be nudging us to change, but he had the humility to be like, yep, I am identifying more with Peter, and I want to live with this open heart approach to anybody that crosses my path. And I was like, thank you so much for saying that. It was so awesome.
Yeah, because I think sometimes God works in our lives. I don't want to speak for him, but it's funny. You look at the life of Peter, and God's like, okay, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Right.
Yeah.
The hard way is the 3 denials, is the bitter weeping, following that third, right? And it's just whatever. And here, again, Peter's grown, Peter's changed. We're on the other side of the resurrection. Peter's preaching at Pentecost. He has the Holy Spirit, and there's openness, but still growth.
Still growth. Well, and there is the rest of the story on this example as well, right? And so later on in Peter's future, like he made the mistake. He said, out of, concern of the Jewish leaders, he chose to no longer associate or eat with some of the Gentile believers. And so he had it right in this Acts 10 moment. And then you look a little further down the road and Paul had to come after him a little bit and be like, Peter, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're a leader. You should not, like, you're setting a bad example, and other people are starting to follow and put that wall back up between people who have both been given the Spirit. And so thankfully, with the life of Peter, we can always be reminded that we might have these moments where we get it, but then there might be moments where we're not getting it, but it's going to always be an opportunity to continually realign your heart with the calling that we have on us as followers.
It's a strangely encouraging story, right? To know that even further and farther along, right, there's grace for those moments.
Totally.
It is. Yeah.
And it's, again, we're all in process. We're all on this journey, and Jesus is at the center of it. So let's just keep him and what he wants to do right at the center of that in our own lives.
Good. Well, as we begin to wrap up, any parting shot or any last word from?
I just glanced at the time. Yeah,
I know.
We went over. Parting shot. Gosh. I was glad to be able to do Acts 10 yesterday. I was just encouraged and challenged by the story myself, and I'm just really excited for where and how we as a body here at Hopevale are going to continue to lean into that story, but then lots of these other Acts 10 stories that we've been diving into, and just realizing and understanding, the reality that, like, the work of the Spirit and the expansion of his church, it truly is unstoppable.
Yeah.
So we can either jump in and be a part of it, or we can shrink back and kind of limit ourselves from those opportunities. And, I think, gosh, I'm going to go on here. We're going to pass 50 minutes.
Fine.
So, Dan, to be honest, there was that one moment in the service where I'm talking about either playing it safe and comfortable or going out on faith, right? And I thought of you, right? It would, on the one hand, it could be easy to continue doing and staying in the job of senior pastor and in that role. You're obviously a long history and, just that long obedience in the same direction of consistency, making it about the kingdom. And I love that. But maybe I'm putting words into your mouth, but I almost feel like you could have come to this place where you're like, yeah, I'm in a safe, comfortable place, and I could do this for another 10 years if I wanted to. Mm-hmm. But you're like, I feel like God is stirring me to go and jump into the unknown and pursue something new and different. And so in the craziness of that, I love that that's your heart and your obedience to step out of even what's comfortable and safe into the unknown of what God is calling you and Kathy to. And that's super exciting and terrifying all at the same time. And then for Hopevale as a church, right, we're in a little bit of this uncertainty. What is the future going to hold and look like? And it's like, this is God's church, and his Spirit continues to be at work, and he knows exactly where he wants to take us. And as a body of Christ, small C local church here in this region, we are going to be just fine as long as we're continuing to lean into what the Spirit wants to do in and through us.
Yeah. So thank you. And so I had a moment this weekend, officiated the funeral for Bob Peschke. Bob passed away at 95, and really, truly is a patriarch of Hopevale. He was here in the early days in the 60s, faithfully served multiple ministries, church choir, a lot of boards, was instrumental in the building of the auditorium in our Shattuck Road campus. Even later in life, he and his wife, Lori, helped get Young at Hearts, the senior ministries going, And it reminded me that all of us here at Hopevale were part of a bigger story. not just even the church going back 2,000 years, but the Hopevale story, that there are ones who've gone before us, who've really laid a foundation, and there are many more coming after us, right? And I just had this moment this week where I'm living in this kind of legacy, and then I'm thinking about the baptism service Wednesday in Bay City and seeing these incredible life stories, right? And it's like we play our part.
Yeah.
It's not about us. The work endures. The work truly is unstoppable, and just what a privilege it is, right? And there are Corneliuses in our world that maybe we could like never imagine, and yet God is drawing people to himself, and Jesus is at work, and it's just, it's awesome.
Amen.
And I just love that week after week after week out of the book of Acts, we get to hammer this home and what it truly means for us to be the church, and how we need each other. Yeah. So, wow. Okay.
Good stuff.
Well, this has been great. Again, just thanks so much for sharing the message there, bringing us into that story, challenging us, having us look at Peter, look at Cornelius, and see ourselves in these characters as well. So, as always, we want to thank you for listening today and want to invite you to join us again next time when we take a deeper dive.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also, make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it is posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family at Hopevale Church.